We can now bring in international affairs expert Sreeram Chaulia for more on this. Now, Iran has said it's not seeking an escalation or war, but does that track with what we've seen?
Well, I think Iran is a strategic player. And they have a calibrated set of responses in mind after General Qassem Soleimani's assassination. I think their main goal, long-term objective, is to ensure the removal of U.S. troops from Iraq. And I think if they take these kind of proportionate acts, as their leaders have been saying, hitting a few bases but not, causing too many casualties of Western forces, then the idea is that eventually, they can run out the clock and the Americans will leave, because there is a Pentagon leak that's just come out, a letter to the Iraqi government saying we are ready to reposition our forces and possibly leave Iraq. So there are multiple, conflicting signals, and I think the Iranians are holding back. One is, of course, they don't want war, as they clearly say, but two, they will take, smaller actions of this sort continuously and wear down the U.S. What I feel is that eventually they will want to see the back of the U.S. and to see American forces depart. And they wouldn't want to provoke Trump right now beyond a point which may lead to permanent, presence of U.S. forces in Iraq. So I think they are taking calibrated action right now. And certainly it is reassuring because otherwise, if it goes out of control totally, then you may have long-term presence, and that will have other implications. Because if the Western forces remain, it maintains consistent strategic pressure on Iran and on its actions. Right now, I think revenge for General Soleimani's killing is one thing, but I think they're also looking at the long-term perspective. But the smaller actions, retaliatory actions or acts of revenge will continue. I don't see this as the sole thing, although the foreign minister said our response is concluded, but I think it will be a continuous thing aimed at all the U.S. alliance system in the region.
Well, Sreeram, Iran says that this attack was self-defense and in accordance to the UN Charter. And in general, I have to say that the UN and the UN Security Council, for instance, it has been brought up in this conflict quite often. We've heard a lot of calls of how matters should be resolved through the UN Security Council, through the process. But so far, all of that has just been verbal. There has been no action, no real action taken no real attempts taken at that. So do you think that the UN has been essentially sidelined in this whole conflict?
Well, the UN, and I would say that the whole international law framework on the basis of which the UN is supposed to operate, all of it has been weakened consistently by U.S. actions. I mean, this was an assassination, first of all, of General Qassem Soleimani, and it was not authorized, to be able to use this kind of force because there was no, evidence of any impending large-scale attack on the U.S. So the claim that it was, in self-defense by the U.S., I think does not wash. And secondly, I think the U.S. is using its power as a permanent member of the Security Council to block any kind of resolution or unanimity to come forward. So, this has been the long-term problem. Whenever the Israel-Palestine question comes up or anything else that the U.S. believes is very significant to its national interest, they try to block action at the UN Security Council. So I think if you look at the opinion in the General Assembly, definitely a vast majority will be opposed to U.S. actions. But because it's undemocratic, the Security Council is undemocratic and not representative of today's changed power realities, the U.S. is still holding on and preventing any kind of, legitimate response by the collective international community. And that's a shame.
Now, today, later on, we're waiting for some sort of statement coming from Donald Trump that he promised on Twitter. And it's also being reported that Iran's president is to deliver a speech as well today. What do you think we might hear from them?
Well, I think Trump is going to call it a big victory, and he's going to basically say, we came out unscathed and we took out a terrorist. That's what they're saying is General Qassem Soleimani. And I think he's going to basically claim victory. If you study Trump as a politician, I don't think he's looking for long-term presence of U.S. forces in the region, nor is he aiming at some kind of hegemony. I think there are other elements in the U.S. government that want that and will now cite the Iranian Iranian threat to try to maintain long-term presence, and they will also say that the allies need to be protected. Israel and other Saudi Arabia, as well as other so-called quote-unquote pro-American or moderate, as they call them, forces need to be protected against a radical Iran. That's what they're going to use, that argument. But I think that debate is playing out, and some of these leaks are suggesting that the U.S. government is not in one voice or unanimous. The Trump administration is divided on this matter. So I think Trump himself is simply looking to bolster his personal popularity, and he's got a political campaign ahead with just hardly 11 months to go for his re-election. So North Korea is not going so well for him. He's not been able to get Kim Jong-un to denuclearize. So I think this he's going to claim as a show of force, but a very limited one. I don't think he's looking for a long-term spiral of war, which is good news. But I think the broader U.S. establishment, many of them are very hawkish. Many of them are very pro-Israeli, and they look at the Iran from the lens of Israel and Israel's threat perception. So they are the ones to watch out for, because they will want war. They will want to use this as a basis to say, look, they're attacking our military bases. We've got to now, respond even harsher. I think Trump will stay their hand. But eventually, the larger question is, what happens to Iran's position in the region? Will the U.S. be willing to accommodate and include Iran in the regional security architecture, or will the Trump administration continue its policy of excluding it and trying to isolate it? Because the more you isolate Iran, the more you're going to get these kind of attacks, as well as through Hezbollah and Hamas and these popular mobilization forces. So Iran has to be accommodated. I don't see any other solution to this problem in the long run, because it belongs to the region, and it has a sphere of influence, and to some extent the US has to concede that. And I think that is the ultimate Iranian goal, and maybe these responses you are seeing tit for tat are based on that ultimate goal. And therefore I think there is some reason to be hopeful that it will not break out into full-scale war. But still, as you rightly said, it's very tense, and the violence will continue at some level. At the threshold, what is the threshold is, I think, what the Iranians and the Americans, the balance of power between the two militaries as well as the allies, will determine it. But below the threshold, I think the violence is going to continue. I don't see this as, finito or end of the story, because Qassem Soleimani is too big a figure for the Iranians to let go or to forgive so easily.
You brought up a very interesting topic, the fact that indeed Donald Trump has a campaign ahead of him, and that fact alone is being taken into consideration, I guess, whenever he decides to do anything right now, anything public. Killing Major General Qassem Soleimani is a big geopolitical step, but also it is obviously Trump did hope for something positive to come out of it at home. Do you think that he will get domestically the effect he desired for, or do you think that this whole thing is backfiring back at him?
I think that Trump's voting base doesn't really care much for foreign policy or for the U.S., maintaining a balance of power in different regions of the world, or hegemony for that matter. Trump's populist voters, the American working class, middle classes, the ones who voted for him last time and many of whom still are with him, I don't think they really care. They've got a very domestic, economic and social and cultural agenda, which includes class and race and economic opportunities and such things. So they may not, particularly the ratings for Trump will not jump automatically as a result of the assassination of General Soleimani of Iran. But I think from what I've seen, he's desperate to show at least one big foreign policy, quote unquote, success. And I think he's going to say, look, we browbeat the Iranians. We showed how powerful our military is. We killed one of their top people and they could not harm us. So he's going to bank on that kind of thing. But there's still many months to go before his the November election, and the Iranians are not going to sit by quietly, because as I said, they have they belong to the region. They are there. They are hunkered down there. They're going to remain in Iraq. They're going to take step-by-step moves. And so eventually, Trump, I think, will want to make some kind of a deal with the Iranians. Frankly, it's almost unthinkable right now because of the high tensions. But the way things are panning out, I would not be surprised that in a few months you have some process. The Japanese are trying behind the scenes to bring rapprochement between Iran and the U.S. I believe Oman has been trying, and some others too. So I think you never know, because Trump needs victories. I mean, the China trade war was, he said, now I got a great deal, and and we are working towards that. That is one. North Korea has not made any headway. Iran, he's going to likely say that, look, I extracted better terms from them, and finally they agreed to tone down some of their activities. End of the day, I think there is a degree of pragmatism when it comes to Trump. He's a politician. He's not an imperialist or a hegemonic liberal imperialist, which is a traditional U.S. foreign policy, which preceded Trump. So I think that is the angle on the basis of which the Iranians are thinking about how to respond, because Trump is very different, and it's in one way he's very easy to understand and deal with, and other ways, very adamant. But I think somewhere between those 2 points, the Iranians are trying to thread the needle.
You touched on the idea of Donald Trump needing victories, and of course that is true. So how hopeful are you that this will end here? We had Trump a while back saying, threatening to hit 50+ Iranian sites, including cultural, but then he backed off on that a bit. And then after the strikes themselves, he's tweeting out, all is well, so far so good. And on the Iranian side, we have Iranian officials saying that if the U.S. responds in any way, that there would be all-out war across the region. And of course, Trump, one of his big points has always been to stop those never-ending wars. So do you think that this could just end here? The threats will probably continue for a little while, and then the dust will settle?
Well, the U.S. Allies, as well as American bases in Iraq and in the region across in Syria, have been attacked repeatedly by some of these popular mobilization forces over the last year or even longer. So it's not that attacks on bases themselves are signs of something new, but what has happened is that Iran is directly doing it now rather than through their proxies. So I think the proxy network that the Iranians have as what they call the axis of resistance to Israel and to the U.S., that will continue. And those activities and actions, as I said, below the threshold of full-scale war, I think are going to continue. This is not the end of the matter, because, as I said, Qassem Soleimani is symbolically so big and so important. His funeral was apparently the second biggest after Ayatollah Khomeini's. So the founder of the Islamic Republic. So clearly, he's such an elevated figure that they will not forgive or forget. But what they will do is try to, as I said, wait it out until the U.S. forces are out of the region and then establish their sphere of influence. So I think that's very clear. And between then and now, what Trump does and what the electoral cycle in the U.S. does will ultimately determine the time and the scale of the U.S. drawdown or the pullback. So I don't think that this is a stepping stone for long-term American presence, because the voters in America don't want these endless wars, as you rightly said.
Well, Iran has now basically warned American regional allies like the United Arab Emirates or the Saudis against helping the United States in any way of striking Iranian targets, saying that if they provide a launch pad or like a ground for American military action against Iran, then they will be targeted as well. So where do you think this conflict will leave America's relationship with its regional allies? Because it can go two ways now, can't it? One way is it will bring them only closer together in the face of a common enemy, or they might see that Washington is not that reliable of a partner, that they can find themselves in hot waters, maybe even unwillingly, because America's unilateral action. So which way will it go, do you think?
Well, they could be dragged into this regional spiral, clearly, because, Israel has to contend with Hezbollah. They claim they have tens of thousands of rockets aimed at Israel from Lebanon. And Hezbollah, of course, is very close to the Iranian establishment. There is Hamas in the Palestinian territories. There are these popular mobilization fronts. There's a Syrian government. So, Iran has assets. And so it can indeed prick here and there, all the U.S. allies. And there seemed to be some kind of a behind-the-scenes attempt to patch up between Saudi and Iran. But I am afraid that now they are going to say that I think the Iranians believe that the attack on Qassem Soleimani was not purely based on U.S. intelligence. There were other regional allies of the U.S. who provided the coordinates and tracked him down, Israeli as well as Saudi, which ultimately led to his assassination. So they will wreak some kind of a revenge against these U.S. allies. And that is the real danger, because the moment that happens, the Israel lobby in the U.S. will jump up and say, hey, we are under attack. and we need to defend ourselves. America do something, hit back at Iran. So, so this is the kind of spiral we should avoid. So it's very important that regional confidence and regional cooperation is built.
We've been speaking with international affairs expert Sreeram Chaulia. Thank you for your time and your comments today.